From Hollywood, the CBS Radio Workshop.
Scat! The world's divided into two kinds of people, ailurophobes and ailurophiles, cat haters and cat lovers. There's no in-between. The man is yet to be born who can take cats or leave them alone. Either you love them or you hate them. I hate them. And even if you're a sweet old lady who lives all alone with 13 pussies, I'm sure you won't think too ill of me when you hear what the king of the cats did to me. Scat, you black fiend!
The CBS Radio Workshop, dedicated to man's imagination, the theater of the mind, presents The King of the Cats by Stephen Vincent Benet, adapted for radio and directed and produced in Hollywood by William N. Robeson.
If I hadn't been so young, I suppose I could have taken it in stride. Of course, I didn't think I was young. I was 2 years out of Yale, and I thought I knew all the answers. Certainly, I knew I was in love. They say the most beautiful women in the world are Eurasian, and they're right. Vivronka's skin was like golden velvet, her long straight hair ebony in the moonlight, and her eyes blue as a field of larkspur, fathomless as the center of heaven. Her mother had been an American missionary, her father Siamese, and undoubtedly a prince, my Aunt Emily insisted. Ordinarily, Aunt Emily wouldn't have approved of Vivronka, but this was the year that the king and I was a sellout at the St. James Theater, so a hostess who could decorate her dinner table with a breathlessly beautiful Siamese princess was definitely a hostess with a mostess. At least Aunt Emily always addressed her as princess, and Vivronka always replied to the title.
My dear princess, how sweet of you to drop in. And tell me how nice you would get away from the office early. Lemon or cream, princess?
Neither, Mrs. Culverin. And no sugar.
Oh, of course, my dear. How stupid of me to forget. Here you are.
Thank you.
Tommy?
I'll get myself a highball if you don't mind.
No, dear, go right ahead. I believe you know everyone, Princess. Mrs. Dandridge.
Yes,
Mrs. Stanford. Professor Fairweather.
Indeed.
Mrs. Dandridge has been telling us about the most fascinating man, my dear. A symphony conductor with a tail.
A tail? How interesting.
I still can't believe it.
I saw it myself, twice. First in Paris, and then again at the Teatro Royale in Rome. He conducted the Beethoven Pastoral, and, my dear, you've never heard such effects from an orchestra. You see, he conducted with it.
With his tail? Oh, no.
Oh, yes. And such a charming person. So urbane, so utterly fascinating.
I should imagine. I would love to meet him.
And you shall, my dear. I'll see to it when he arrives.
Oh, he's coming over?
Yes. Yes, the new symphony people have invited him to be guest conductor for 3 concerts. He'll be very busy, of course, but he's promised to give me what time he can spare.
Oh, that's sweet of you, dear, but you mustn't wear yourself out. The rest of us must do our part, too. I'll be only too glad to help entertain him.
Oh, now, that won't be necessary. I'm just going to give Monsieur Thibault... Sweet name, isn't it? Felix Thibault. I'm just going to show him the simplest of times. A little reception for 100 or so after his first concert. Perhaps he hates large mixed parties on account of his little idiosyncrasy. It makes him feel a trifle shy of strangers.
I should think it would, to say nothing of his friends and acquaintances. Vivronka, my dear, how would you like to go out night-clubbing with a jerk with a tail?
It might be interesting.
Huh?
He is not a jerk, Tommy. He is one of the finest conductors in Europe.
Sounds to me like he's the smartest showman since P.T. Barnum. What do you think, Professor?
Well, I should be interested to see this Monsieur Thibault myself. In the Middle Ages, there was a widespread belief in homo caudatus, or men with tails, but I know of no authenticated case. Of course, we all have tails, in a manner of speaking.
What?
Oh, vestigial, of course. But the last few vertebrae of anyone's spine, the coccyx, is the evidence of a concealed and rudimentary tail. I dare say it might be possible in an extraordinary case that a throwback, a reversion to type.
How fascinating! I never realized that Well, I think it'd be fun to get together a box for the first concert, all of us.
Oh, well, I'm afraid I shall have my own box party. But of course you'll come on to the reception later at my place.
Why, thank you, my dear. Then there'll be the professor and the princess and Tommy.
Count us out, Aunt Emily. When Vivranka and I want to see freaks, we'll go to the circus.
I shall be very pleased to attend the concert, Mrs. Culverin.
Ah, splendid, my dear.
But Vivranka...
Is there anyone you'd like me to ask to replace Tommy?
But Aunt
It
Emily...
doesn't make any difference. I'm only interested in meeting this wonderful Monsieur Félix Thibault.
But Vivranka... I went to the concert. What else could I do? We took our seats in the box as the orchestra took theirs on stage and began their aimless squeakings and tootings, those caterwaulings which I must confess make about as much sense to me as the music that follows. Aunt Emily was in a dither of fluttery expectation. Professor Fairweather had lost much of his scientific detachment, and Vivranka, gorgeous Vivranka, sat beside me silent, but so tense I could almost feel her breathless expectation, and I didn't like it at all. And then Monsieur Thibault walked on stage, a lithe, dark-haired man with piercing eyes like a black panther, his head weaving the way the big cats do when they're behind bars. It was true. They hadn't lied. From beneath the tails of his dress coat curled a third, a living tail, which he carried nonchalantly draped over his wrist. He acknowledged the presence of the audience with a regal bow, and then that incredible tail twined with dainty carelessness around a black baton on the podium. While he remained facing the audience, the tail rapped 3 times upon the podium for the orchestra's attention, and then raised for the downbeat. At this horrible moment, I glanced at Vivranka. Her whole body was rigid as steel, and the blue flowers of her eyes were bent upon Monsieur Thibault in terrible concentration. She took my hand in hers, and her long red fingernails felt like a claw as the hideous tail of that monster on stage lashed into the downbeat of Night on Bald Mountain. Never before had the new symphony orchestra played so superbly, and certainly never had it been led with such a genius. Freak, showman, poseur, whatever else Monsieur Thibault might have been, he was certainly a great conductor. No man's hands and arms, no matter how dexterous or eloquent, ever equaled the delicate elan and powerful grace of Monsieur Thibault's tail. A sable staff, it dominated the brasses like a flicker of black lightning. An ebon and elusive whip, it drew the last exquisite breath of melody from the woodwinds and ruled the stormy strings like a magician's wand. That's the way it went through the Bach Passacaglia, through the Afternoon of a Faun, through the Beethoven Ninth. New York music lovers had never heard anything like it before, and New York music lovers never behaved quite like this before. As Monsieur Thibault finally glided from the stage after his 15th bow, the president of the Wednesday Sonata Club had to be forcibly restrained by her husband from flinging her $90,000 string of pearls after the maestro in an excess of aesthetic appreciation. And as we shouldered our way through the hysterical mob toward the waiting limousines, I distinctly heard Ludwig Willems, conductor of the mid-century Philharmonic, say to Dr. Friedrich Laskar, the great plastic surgeon,
But it must be possible, Doctor. Think of the miracles they have accomplished in Denmark. There's $10,000 in it for you, Doctor, if only you can find a way to graft the tail onto me.
But through all the hysteria, Vivranka remained silent, self-possessed, her azure eyes fathomless as the center of heaven. She was silent as we drove to Mrs. Dandridge's party in Aunt Emily's limousine. But this was not too remarkable, because Aunt Emily never stopped raving about Monsieur
But
Thibault.
aside from the heavenly music, my dears, the man himself, such elegance, such poise, such... I tell you, Tommy, if your Uncle Henry weren't still around, and I was a few years younger, well, tail and all.
Our hostess, Mrs. Dandridge, looked like the cat who had swallowed the canary, having trapped the social lion of the season, if I may be permitted to scramble a metaphor. Let Aunt Emily have her Siamese princess. Dolly Dandridge had the world's greatest conductor, complete with tail.
And this, dear Monsieur Thibault, is my dearest friend. Emily, may I present Monsieur Thibault? Monsieur Thibault, Mrs. Henry Culverine.
Enchanté, Madame Colverine.
Oh, Monsieur Thibault, it is an honor to meet you. I am overcome.
Yes, thank you much, Madame.
I feel I should be on bended knee.
It is not necessary.
Oh, I should kiss your hand.
You are too kind, no?
Oh, I must.
No, please, Madame.
He stopped trying to stop Aunt Emily from making a fool of herself. He had seen Vivranka. The end of his tail, just the very end, twitched turgidly, and he seemed to be at her side in a bound rather than a step. It was foolish and superfluous for Mrs. Dandridge to do the honors.
Princess, may I present Monsieur Thibault? Monsieur, Princess Vivranka.
Maestro.
Princess.
They exchanged no more words. Monsieur Thibault presented his arm to the princess. She linked hers in his, and his infernal tail switched from his right arm to his left to come to rest across Vivranka's wrist. Thus, like royalty, they made their way across the room, the guests parting to make a path for their regal progress.
Now, Tommy, you mustn't take it so hard. After all, the princess is an awfully sweet child, but she isn't exactly our kind.
And I suppose she's his.
She seems to be. Look at them. So darlingly foreign, both of them.
Yeah, aren't they? Out of this world.